Electrocast.
Cars say a lot about who we are.
It represents freedom for a lot of people.
This season on Drive, I'm going to talk to all sorts of different people.
I looked at car names.
Yes.
And
yes.
I found all the car names that have science or astronomically
it's
inspired.
Crazy.
It's huge.
It is. Yes, I happen to be CEO of Ford Motor Company. For me, it's all about cars, movement, and our mutual passion for things that get us around. This is Drive, and I'm Jim Farley.
Reese's peanut butter cups are the greatest, but let me play devil's advocate here. Let's see. So, no, that's a good thing. That's definitely not a problem. Reese's, you did it. You stumped this charming devil.
Hold on to your butts.
We are changing the course of history as we see it. That is what Western demands.
Now, this affects Iris. Iris, where are you?
What you feel only matters to you. I do not entertain hypotheticals. The world as it is vexing enough.
Iris, I have a tip for you.
Don't take drugs!
Or Whatever Movies with Wesley and Iris.
What up and welcome to Or Whatever Movies. I'm your co-host Iris, and I'm here with my older brother,
Wesley.
Today we're talking a movie from 2022, available on Prime Video, a Prime original, 13 Lives.
13 Lives.
That's a good one. And that was a reference to our British cast. Viggo Mortensen, however, not British.
Nope. And he actually acted in this one. It's weird to say because he affected a British accent for Lord of the Rings, but I never considered him like a immersive actor kind of guy. He also did his Russian accent for the Russian gangster movie. What was it called?
Eastern Promises?
That's the one. Like, he can do accents, but I felt like he actually acted. Colin Farrell, likewise, that wasn't his accent here. They both modeled them very closely on the two actual guys that they portrayed, and I'm not sure how necessary that was, but, I mean, I admire your commitment. Let's do it. Because certainly the filming wasn't harrowing.
I'm detecting sarcasm?
Yeah, man. The poster has the boys in silhouette. It's like a cross section of the cave, so you can see the topography, and it's the kids standing on a dry ledge, and then the path submerges, and you can see a diver in the water. Like, oh, there's a rock in the way, but otherwise the waterway is open and wide. It's pristine blue, and it's all calm.
Yeah.
And I was like, what's the problem? You guys can't swim? Like, I was legitimately surprised when it first happened. You guys just traversed the road, so maybe you know how tight it was and stalactites and stalagmites and stuff. But weren't you a little bit surprised at first that the coach, who bears responsibility, didn't kind of go for it? Like, all right, guys, before it gets too crazy, let me try to make my way out.
Well, we don't get any of the journey into the cave beyond. Next part is the cool part, and that's it. We're done. Yeah. It's a flash flood, and there's no turning back.
It was kind of confounding because they're kicking the ball, and I didn't really see a lot of their faces. And I was like, how are we going to care about 13 different dudes all, like, you know, before we lose them to the cave? Is it going to keep flashing back to them? Why do I care? And then it kind of didn't matter. And then Kai, the main kid, I think he was the little kid with the pink mask, right?
Mm-hmm. The littlest.
They all pull up and he throws his bike down, and his bike is the only one on the floor. And like in a weird like Beatles Abbey Road cover kind of way, I was like, what's the symbolism? Is it foreshadowing? Kai's bike has fallen and his is the only one on the ground.
Oh no.
But man, 13 Lives is what it was about, but it wasn't about these kids, that's for sure.
No, it really wasn't. And I understand that Viggo Mortensen's character, Rick Stanton, has to dehumanize them in order to complete the mission. He literally says they're packages, and then he makes this little conveyance motion with his hands. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. That's what you have to do in order to complete this mission. But really, it's not unlike how the movie treats the boy soccer team characters. They really are packages. They are personified stakes that don't really have a human backstory.
It's true, but they were human. We did spend a lot of time with them and their coach and talking about going home and the birthday celebration. And it was very, how would you say it, Thai. You know what I mean? I mean, they were riding through the rice fields and stuff, and that those were later flooded to aid in their escape. But the first 20 minutes was almost entirely in Thai. I did know that the one person who lost his life, Saman, was a Thai diver. And I didn't necessarily know that they were international divers, and frankly was a little bit concerned that this movie kind of became what I was worried would be a white savior movie.
Yeah. You think it became that?
Well, I was afraid that it was, that they were going to focus on these dudes and their heroics. And that, I guess, could be construed as the case, but they certainly didn't act heroic. If anything, Rick was avoiding the spotlight because of, I can't remember which one it was, but basically they kind of said, we'll get him out. And then if they brought one kid out, then they would have been heroes. But if now, when they came so far with the media, if they had lost a kid, then it would have been really bad. Like a single kid has to be a complete and total miracle or not at all. And unfortunately, a diver lost his life. And you saw in the card that another guy also passed away from the blood infection he contracted. Really, really sad. I mean, these kids seemed humble and respectful, and I'm sure that they feel keenly that, the people who died, they bear some of the responsibility for that, for wandering into the cave. And Kelly kept insisting, because I was holding them accountable. Kelly Ray's like, they are kids. It's, they can't help it. They're kids.
A couple people died, and, 5,000 plus lives were affected. 5,000 plus people were actively trying to get these kids out of the cave.
It's a huge operation. To further the point of that the movie wasn't necessarily based on the kids, but it also wasn't necessarily a hero story.
The heroes were very humble, and the heroes were very skilled, but it wasn't, like you were saying, there weren't heroic antics. But it's definitely a Western perspective of the story, which was an international story, and which is a uniquely Thai story. I was grateful that they did highlight the Thai engineer, who I guess was also from Chicago, but was in Bangkok at the time, and his ragtag team of volunteers just up on the mountain, cutting bamboo into pipes. And so I really liked that story. There was a real sense of teamwork and camaraderie, even though there wasn't a sense of overarching organization amongst the different volunteer teams. And I almost wondered if there was this second or third world commentary about operations like this. Like, would this have been a clinical, charted out, highly controlled operation had this happened in the West?
I can't imagine. I mean, nobody's planned for these situations. I was shocked that there was, what was it called? The British Cave Rescue Council that exists. And I'm hoping it was just those two dudes who came up with business cards or something, because if that's not the case, then, people need to be a bit more careful.
Colin Farrell's John Volanthen, as far as I understand, was an IT consultant. He's in his little tie and his tidy little glasses in his little fastidious apartment, and he's a cave diver rescuer?
Yeah, they had their cards made up at Kinko's or whatever the equivalent was. But Colin Farrell said that Viggo Mortensen took the lead and he followed that role, and that seems to be the case in real life between Rick and what's-his-nuts. What was his counterpart's name?
Rick and John.
Yeah, so I think that Rick definitely took the lead, and John was a hero in his own right. He was the dedicated volunteer who had some expertise, at least, and figured that he could carry it out, quite literally.
John calls Rick and says, "Are you going to do this?" And then Rick plays coy and is like, "Oh, you're going to call somebody else?" And they're all flirting with each other and stuff, and then they eventually get to Thailand. But it was John that initiated it, at least according to Ron Howard's interpretation. When Rick's like, "I'm not going in to die," the flooding's worse, and they're deciding whether or not they're going to actually act on the mission. You see John stops and looks at Rick, and they all look at Rick, and Rick makes that ultimate decision.
It adds to the sort of chaotic level where who's in charge? Every time somebody new showed up, and Joel Edgerton showed up, and you're like, okay, well, he's going to play some kind of fairly prominent role. I was surprised in the first place because I didn't know anything about this movie other than its vague premise, and that I didn't know that Colin Farrell and Viggo Mortensen were in it. So when new people started to show up, I was like, oh man, somebody's going to have a major role. And generally in disaster movies like this, or rescue movies, one of them is going to die. And it's like, okay, who are they setting up and who's ultimately going to die? To your earlier point, whether or not this would have been a more organized mission, I can't imagine it was. I imagine it was people who came in with their level of expertise and did a job that they hoped would help in the cumulative that would, get these boys out. Because I don't think they ever had a clear plan until they came up with this wacko nuts idea that I never would have signed off on. Never.
If you were the governor or the mayor If you were in the mayor's position, you'd be like, no way.
Absolutely not. The variable, I can't imagine justifying the variable, the unknown quantity of the sedative and how it would work on 13 different kids and the coach and that one of them wouldn't be allergic, that one of them wouldn't wake up and start struggling and freaking out, because they got the weakest kids out first in real life, the ones who needed the most medical attention. But you take one of the strongest and you test this, theory and see if it's even possible. I think they would just all go all day with the plan. I never would have done it. I can see binding the hands and feet, so if they do freak out or have a panic attack, it's fine. But the coach in real life apparently was helpful. There was a lot of criticism levied at him for letting them get in that position in the first place. But he was a monk, like a Buddhist monk, when he was younger. But he was teaching the boys to meditate in the cave.
Yeah.
Like, do the same. I get it. You can't teach them to cave dive because that's Rick and Bob's specialty. But you can teach them, listen, close your eyes the whole time. We're going to bind your hands and feet. The only thing you're going to have to concentrate on is your breathing. You keep breathing, you stay alive, and you remain pliable while we pull you through this thing. Seems infinitely better than monitoring their unconsciousness.
For 3 to 5 hours. Have you ever tried? Have you tried meditating for 10 minutes? Is hard.
But then he was like, well, "You're here because of your specialty," and he's like, "What? Like diving? Like what?" And they're like, "No."
Oh, I love that. I love that
specialty.
he was like, "I'm way out of my league here." He's like
It was
all
so
oblivious.
It was so absurd. But then again, this whole movie is absurd. They often said if it was in a movie, you wouldn't believe it. But now they're making a movie about it because I had no idea how terribly harrowing it would be. Everyone on set experienced panic attacks, and they were in like little resin caves and stuff in segments.
Oh,
Totally
man.
freaking out. They said that it's not uncommon for cave divers to have the cuts and scrapes on their knuckles that we saw. And for the first day, that was makeup. And then after that, they didn't need the makeup.
Oh, man. Like, I get it, but I mean, I dive. I wear gloves. If you're inching through caves and you're diving 5 hours, like, why not wear gloves? I guess they just really needed that tactile sense of being able to hold on to the rope.
And here's the most horrible part about this whole thing for me. And Mom and Dad watched it. It was harrowing. I think that Kelly Ray was dreading the stress of them in these tight quarters and stuff and the claustrophobia. I've been spelunking in caves, and that was tight and freaky and scary. I can't imagine being submerged in water. Like, you're a diver, and I've done snorkeling, and snorkeling in Hawaii was too extreme for me. I had to periodically take off the mask and breathe and stuff. But
snorkeling in paradise.
Right. So visibility is limited for sure. And the two guys, they praised the movie for its accuracy, except for one critical detail that I cannot get my head around.
Rick and John praised the movie except for 2 critical details?
Yes, it was really accurate. It was wonderfully presented and how harrowing it was. And they didn't, it wasn't like a beautiful, glorious diving movie. It was lots of grunting and scraping and tight corners and stuff. Except that in real life, the visibility was 0. 0. Can you imagine? They were clinking and going around, and maybe they could follow the line, but they could see nothing. And as a result, and for cave diving, as they said, it's so much about guiding yourself via tactile measures and stuff. They needed to be able to feel with their hands, and so they don't wear the gloves. And so they were literally feeling these ways, only knowing that there's a direction they need to be generally heading, and maybe it's too cramped to be turned around, but it doesn't make much of a movie, they said, if the viewer can't see anything. But that would have been the more realistic depiction. Horrifying.
It would just be a black screen and sound design the entire time.
So, the one thing they did was to make the water at least somewhat visible.
It wasn't pristine like maybe it was in the poster. It was definitely cloudy. It seemed like visibility was maybe, I don't know, a few feet. But at least you could see if you're diving straight for a stalactite.
This is like 10 times worse than the Shawshank Redemption. Andy had to crawl through 500 yards of shit-smelling foulness to his freedom. That's, what did it say? The length of 5 football fields, just shy of half a mile. These were mile-long stretches at a time in the dark. And I wrote down initially, the time jumps are a little bit jarring. There's like 2 hours after they went into the cave, 5 hours, 2 days, 5 days. And I'm like, man, they are zipping through this. Because when they're going through the cave, even the preliminary dives to find them in the first place, they're like, okay, well, let's get suited and booted. Let's go in. How far is it? It's like they're miles of crawling and scraping your knuckles in zero visibility.
And they did it day after day. Did they really do the extractions like 3 or 4 days in a row?
I'm confident that the time laid out was totally accurate. It's like 9 days, guys. You might want to step on it. Like, it's getting worse. And then it's like 6 days later and they're sitting around and the governor is like, no more people dive until we see what the weather does. And it's like, dude, they got to send one emissary with power bars strapped all over his body to get to those kids because they're probably not doing very well.
Rick and John are obviously surprised when they find the kids, but they're like, isn't that the point where you're like, damn, I wish I brought an apple? Like, yeah. They had no food on them. They were like, bye.
Yeah, if not them, then for yourself.
Yes, something.
Did you note that he pops out of the water and he starts sniffing and he's like, what's that smell?
He did.
They were fully confident they were going to find dead bodies.
They never answered that. I'm assuming it was waste.
Yeah, the kids were alive in there, but they were crapping somewhere in there. And he said he could smell the boys when he came up upon them the first time. That was the first indicator that they were close to something. And I have to admit, or I have to guess, that it was pooping in the back of the cave, which couldn't have been pleasant.
Oh, man. Especially when there's like low oxygen and no ventilation.
When they were like, oh, okay, so here's where you get to Pattaya Beach or whatever, and this is like 3.2 kilometers in. I was like, what? Okay, it's definitely easier. There's got to be shafts. The water is getting in there somewhere. Find the biggest sinkhole or find the biggest inlet and just drill straight, like widen that hole, the aperture, and go straight down, right? You'll be saving miles.
I did think that was going to be the ultimate solution when they So when they first find the boys and Rick's assessing the situation, he goes to the cave and he's like, what's this? And then the kids are like, dig, we dig with hands. And he's like, impressed? He nods his head. He says like, good job or something like that. I was thinking, oh, okay. All right. So that's what eventually is going to happen. They're going to find out what's on the other end of where they've begun digging, and they're going to break through the mountain.
They themselves, Goonies style, and let the pirate ship out.
Right. Exactly.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Reese's peanut butter cups are the greatest, but let me play devil's advocate here. Let's see. So, no, that's a good thing. That's definitely not a problem. Reese's, you did it. You stumped this charming devil.
Yeah, I thought that was going to be the solution too, but I think he was more just sort of affirming their tenacity and their determination to survive.
The first 10 days or so of this movie are really frustrating, and I can't imagine what it would have been like to be following the story in real time. Like the first 10 to 15 days in this movie, I'm like, what are they doing? Like, do something, please. They're in there for, I guess they just didn't know what to do, but I felt like they were really taking their time considering the boys were in there with no food.
Yep. As it got longer, it got worse because obviously they're so malnourished and they've been in the dark for days. This is the uncertainty of is my boy alive? It seems like as portrayed in the movie, and certainly these are dramatized events and unfortunately I didn't follow it in real time. It seems like they were really lucky because if the monsoon season had continued, it would have flooded as it said it did for the next 8 months if they hadn't had those few days of reprieve to actually affect the rescue.
Really insane. And the fact that this is a tourist cave and is pretty much unmonitored, like you'd think that they would have at least maybe it's in Thai, but like no flash flood warnings. like national parks and recreation, this tourist attraction is closed due to weather.
It's why you can't put responsibility on the coach. It was late. It wasn't quite raining, but it was verging on monsoon season. There was nobody around to be like, hey, don't go in that cave, because apparently they had done it. This team they rode by that cave every day on their way to practice and had been in the cave multiple times. And so it was so casual as to be like, oh, it's birthday. We're going to dip into the cave for a bit. I'm not sure if the place that they ended up was as far as they had gone, but they had gone deep into the cave as a lark on multiple occasions. And the only difference was that the monsoon came when it did.
People criticized the coach for allowing them to do this and maybe missing the opportunity to just praise him for going with them. Like, at least as portrayed here, he says, I'll come with you. Like, it's almost like he's looking out for them. And thank goodness he did, because had he not, they definitely wouldn't have survived. And I was so impressed by how obedient they were to their coach, how they really revered him and looked up to him. Like when they're talking about who should go first, the coach says, Kai, which doesn't work out, but they don't argue. Coach says he goes first. He goes first. Regardless of whether he was responsible, he certainly is an unsung hero in this situation.
I mean, I know it's not funny, but presented as a Western movie, you could see how if this had happened, like in California or something, how ridiculously different it would have been. Kevin Hart would have been screaming like, hey, I gotta get out of here. It's my birthday, motherfucker. And like all belligerent and not at all. Like how many American kids would consent to being put under?
Especially if it was in California. It'd be like, I don't know, talk to my lawyer.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about the filmmaking here. So you had filmmaking, including acting. You had referenced Viggo Mortensen actually acting. I think that's interesting. Like to hear more about it. Colin Farrell, too, I felt like he kind of veers into Jared Leto territory for a while, where he just wants to be completely transformed or lost in a character, or he wants to just play really weird characters. I felt like Colin Farrell was really stripped down, raw, naked, and ordinary in this film, which for Colin Farrell was like a big departure.
I mean, he's played ugly before. Look at the Penguin. But I agree. And I, again, wasn't sure how necessary that commitment was. Nobody knows who the dude is that he's portraying. He was on a few talk shows and he wrote a book and stuff. But he was like, no, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to wear glasses. And I think Colin Farrell actually does wear glasses. But he changed so much about himself that when I was watching, I was like, holy crap, that's Viggo Mortensen. And Kelly Ray was like, yeah, and that's the other guy. What was his name? The one who's Irish all the time? It's like Colin Farrell. Yeah, that guy. And he took up running, which is what Bob does in real life. I mean, that's a commitment. John, far away from what is necessary for the role. He shaved his trademark widow's peak to look more like John. And it's like, look, I get the determination and the dedication to your craft, but I'm not sure that it was necessary.
I think it was just necessary to be someone other than Colin Farrell. He almost gets lost in the role, but not in a buried in the makeup kind of a way, or not in a larger-than-life antique kind of way. Like, he's just kind of lost in this very normal, nothing kind of role in a way that he is transformative.
Yeah, that caused him to have real-life panic attacks. That, look, if you're going to go methody, learn to control and steel your nerves against cave diving.
Yeah, the filmmaking was pretty panic-inducing. It was also very procedural, I thought, but
I think it needed to be, because you can't visually track their progress.
But it wasn't boring. It didn't lose my interest. Maybe because it was filmed in such a way that made it harrowing, but the filmmaking just reminded me how happy I was to be in my bed.
Yeah. Ron Howard, maybe not surprisingly, but Ron Howard, of course, the child actor from the Andy Griffith Show, is great at these kinds of movies. He's a very technically skilled filmmaker. And some of his, more dramatic movies have kind of fallen through the cracks, but this is his third real-life dramatic rescue-style movie after Everest and the amazing Apollo 13 and 13 Lives, all of which are sort of claustrophobic due to the elements. And especially in the case of Apollo 13, I've only seen Everest once, I think. The tight quarters and most especially the technical jargon, the steps that they had to follow in order to effect this rescue in space with almost no power at their disposal. It had to be a technical process. I think mapping this cave, and at first I was like, ooh, that's a little bit weird to put the cave diagram on screen. And then by the end, I was completely reliant on it. I was like, where are they? And I was relieved when they would come up for breath in the little caverns for a little bit of exposition and to check and see if the frickin' kids were still breathing. My God. I couldn't have justified taking non-breathing kid out if you flip him over and he dies. Like, he died like 4 times. Can we not do that with this? Can we not do this with that kid?
I was also relieved when Chris pops up in that one cave and he is like, I don't know where I am. Like, maybe relieved is the wrong word, but I felt like that was a very real moment of bringing the disorientation that comes into a situation like this. Like, he parks his kid. He's gathering himself and partially just waiting for one of his team members to kind of help him out. I was kind of surprised that Joel Edgerton, who's quite a accomplished and at this point well-known actor, kind of played a smaller secondary role to John and to Rick, or to Colin Farrell and Viggo Mortensen. But it was his moment in the cave where he gently takes charge, where Harry gently takes charge of Chris and Chris's charge, his kid. Yeah. That was a really, really nice moment for Joel Edgerton as an actor.
Yeah, he's great in these supporting type roles, strong supporting type roles. But most importantly, Chris and the character of Chris, it's important to note that this wasn't his failing. He wasn't less of a hero, as everyone told him, and in the end he was hugging families and stuff and talking with them. But his moment of, I guess, weakness or unsurety didn't play as, oh man, here's the weak link in the chain. You know what I mean? Everyone has those moments of weakness. He got disoriented and confused, and it wasn't like he was afraid. He just got stuck for a second. And so when Joel Edgerton's character helps him out, I'm going to take the kid, and it's not a reflection of your performance.
Brian and I talk a lot about emotionality in films and this idea that kindness is more tear-jerking or emotional than sadness. So when Harry is like, I'll take him, give me a chance to be your hero. Like, it was so kind and gentle and exactly what the Chris character needed, but delivered in such a masked, kind way. I was really touched.
It's a good thing that we had that character, because Rick, the Viggo Mortensen character, wasn't going to do it. Because he was going to be hard-nosed. If Aragorn can't get those kids out of the cave, nobody can. I mean, he would have done it the Abyss style. Like, let's kill them all and drag them out and see we can resuscitate.
Right. Like Ed Harris style?
Yeah. Just like, well, we only need one of us. I'll do it. And he'll tie them hand to foot like the human centipede and drag them out all at once.
Oh, my God. So speaking of, we need to get some kind of resolution for our main character, Rick Stanton. He's at home. He's making coffee. He's alone. What did it mean?
He wasn't a hero.
What did it mean that he looked at the bracelet?
He acknowledged the fact that this was something a little bit larger than the technical effort that he made it out to be. He made a decision. He wasn't going to go in. It wasn't grand. He didn't care about the sleeping princess. He didn't want the accolades, and he didn't want the whole town cheering for him. It was an operation that he was best suited, and so he saw it as his duty to perform that. And if the governor won't let him in, then he's going to drink coffee. But then he goes back to his normal, non-heroic life. But then he sees the bracelet, I think, and realizes, okay, maybe this was something different. Maybe this was something a little bit more special because of how important it was to everyone around him, even if it wasn't to him. I think it was a nice, quiet, understated moment of a real person who did a heroic thing, whether or not he did acknowledge it, because both of them individually wrote books. And I think Rick's was where the title came from, 13 Lessons for Saving 13 Lives.
I read the bracelet as, the bracelet to me was a symbol of blessing. What I read into that moment was that somehow his life was blessed by what he had done, just like he blessed the lives of those kids. I mean, the bracelet was blessed by the monks, and it itself was supposed to be a blessing and a good omen going into the caves. He had it with him the whole time. think it was some kind of acknowledgement of, that he had been changed, even if in a subtle way, or that he had been blessed somehow by this experience. And ultimately we needed the Rick character. Ultimately, the real world, in real life, we needed a character like Rick to accomplish a task like this, because that's what it takes to dive for 5 hours in a pitch black cave day after day after day. And so he's not a conventional hero, but he and all of them were these real life heroes that I was really pleased to see put to screen in a very practical way. Now, it still doesn't excuse that these white men were portrayed as the heroes for this movie. I hope that we see the Thai version of 13 Lives, and I can only hope that it would be as expertly crafted as it would be by Ron Howard, or a Western filmmaking utilizing all the advancements of Western filmmaking technique. But for what it was, and for bringing this story to me, delivering it to me in such a very convenient, tidy, and accessible package, was a very entertaining experience. And so, for that reason, I give it a good.
I'm glad you got the fuzzy. I similarly had, the harrowing experience where it was not a feel-good movie, obviously, but I definitely wanted it to skew more away from hero territory, even than it did. These guys weren't really portrayed as heroes in the conventional Western sense. I was glad that they gave the tribute to Salman and the other diver who died later, or the other participant who died later. But it wasn't the grand scale Forrest Gump style, every man is a hero kind of vibe, because Harry's dad died and they focused on that, and he was doing his grim duty in the face of that, and Aragorn didn't get his custard creams, and I was like, come on. If nothing else, that dude should get free custard creams for life. I enjoyed it, definitely above the line for technical skill and the commitment of the actors for a movie that I, assumed would be kind of a throwaway thing. Definitely give it an all right.
I'm just waiting for the 13 Lives Thai Cave Escape Room board game.
And the Funko Pop figures.
Yes, exactly. Because, we're just starting the commercialization train for what otherwise is an amazing true story and a pretty darn good film. So that's our discussion on 13 Lives. Ron Howard's 13 Lives available on Prime, Amazon Prime Video. If you enjoyed this episode, hit us up, 818-835-0473 or whatevermovies@gmail.com. We love to hear from you, and we also take movie review requests. So send us the title of the film you'd like for us to review and become a movie friend on Patreon, and we will do just that. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Welcome, explorers of the human experience. This is Let's Talk Soul, and I'm your host, Claudia Monicelli. We're not afraid of the great mysteries of existence here. Soul versus consciousness, we're on it. Spirituality versus science, we've got that covered too. Join us in navigating these profound topics with wisdom, curiosity, and a dash of audacity. Whether you're a spiritual veteran or just starting your journey, Let's Talk Soul is your passport to the unknown. Let's Talk Soul, diving into the depths of the human spirit. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey there, I'm DC. I host the rock podcast, Back to the Arena, The Interviews. It's about a 30-minute podcast where I talk one-on-one with a band who has released new music. You can find us on all the best podcast sites like Spotify, Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, and more. If you're a rock fan like me, subscribe today to Back to the Arena, The Interviews.
Electricast. Electricast.